Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the LinguaFolio Café session. Today is January 18th, 2022, and it is 3:30 p.m. Our agenda for today has a lot of really good information. We're going to continue working on the TEL criteria and subcriteria. Today we're going to see CO2. The teacher shares with students how language proficiency develops. And we're going to have other information about reflections on these criteria related or aligned to the ELD standards and world languages essential standards. And we're going to talk about the biography components and really good news that we have to share today. Then we're going to wrap up with some information about PD and reminders that you can take and share with other educators in your school districts. So first of all, we want to thank you for joining us. We're grateful for your attendance and participation. We hope everyone has stayed warm. This weekend was a little difficult. We hope that some of you were able to enjoy the snow. Sadly, we only got some icy rain in the triangle. We didn't get a lot of snow, but we're glad that everything was fine and we didn't lose power. So you have joined my colleague, Dr. Anne-Marie Ganter, World Languages Consultant, and I, Satli Stokes, ESL Title III Consultant, and the NC Department of Public Instruction. We lead the LinguaFolio for NC team in the state initiative implementing LinguaFolio as a tool to promote language development and autonomous learning. The Webex features that we're going to use today are mainly the chat. So please add your comments and questions in the main chat, and don't forget to select everyone. So if you can hear me loud and clear, please type in the chat, and remember, select everyone, because in this way we all will be able to see your comments, and then you will be able to participate and enjoy the conversation while we share some of the information. So you may also request to be unmuted, and you are free to share some of your ideas and experience as we develop the session in the LinguaFolio Cafe today. So I invite Anne-Marie to go to the next slide. We're going to have some polls to help us understand a little bit and learn more about you, your interest in this PD, and your location. So this data will help us improve our offerings and make sure that we are reaching all our educators in the state. So we're going to see on the slide, we see poll number 1 or activity 1A. And I think Anne-Marie is going to help me launch the polls. So this one, you can select all that apply to you. So you should be able to see the polls on the right side of your screen. It says polling, and then it has the question, what motivated you to participate in this webinar today? So you have 5 options. Access professional development that was made for ESL and or world languages educators, earn 1 contact hour for license renewal, gather information to share with colleagues, learn about implementing our state standards, and want to find out more about state standards, resources, and policies. So I see some of you are submitting your responses. Remember that you can add as many as you want. You can select as many as you want. I want to see. As we get some more participants joining in today, thank you. We are completing our first poll. We want to know what motivated you to participate in this webinar today. Okay, so we see our poll has been closed and we have 86% of our participants access professional development made for ESL and or world languages educators. And you also are interested in earning 1 contact hour for license renewal. We'll give you more details about this at the end in our reminders. And we also have a new option this year. So if you want to share this recording with a colleague, then that person has some time to be able to earn this contact hour as well, if that's something they desire. And then another highlight we have learn about implementing our state standards from other language educators. Thank you. This is really important. We really open these spaces for you to collaborate and talk, having these networking opportunities. We love guiding the conversation, but we really want to hear from you. And because we have a small group today, we hope that you don't feel shy and you get participative in the chat, or you ask to be unmuted so we can hear from you. So thank you for participating in this poll. We are going to continue. We have one more poll before we start our topic. And this poll is, where are you joining us from? So if you look at the map, there are different regions in the state, and you will see our polling options. Thank you. And the options are organized by regions. So those headings that you see above the different areas of the state, if you can see where you are located, then select that region. And if you are joining us from out of state, please let us know in the chat. There is also another option. Option I will let you select that option. But if you want to be more specific and share where you're joining us from, please feel free to use the chat for that. And I'm just saying hello in the chat. Make sure that my chat is working, that you can hear me. And I see you are completing. Thank you. Ooh, we have somebody from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Awesome. I get you got a lot of snow up there. We're so jealous. Okay, so I see we are closing our poll. And most of our participants, oh, well, we have some people from the western areas of the state. We have Southwest, Sun Hills, and the next big group would be outside of the state. We have, okay, we have somebody from Wilmington, North Carolina, and our friend from Pittsburgh. All right, thank you. So thank you for adding, submitting your response. We really appreciate when you participate in these chats. And we're going to close this polling. And now I'm going to invite Anne-Marie to give us the overview of the TEL criteria and sub-criteria that we have selected for today's session.
Great. Thanks so much, Sally. Well, we are focusing on today the TEL criteria, or Teacher Effectiveness for Language Learning, TEL framework criteria of collaboration. You see that little screenshot of that document in the upper right corner of the slide. And specifically, we're looking at collaboration subcriteria 2, which says the teacher shares with students how language proficiency develops. Obviously, that's an important topic for all of us, whether we're teaching a second language or we're teaching English as a second language. So
I guess I can do this. Oh, okay, go for it.
One of the things we want to focus on is how important looking at proficiency and sharing with students how language proficiency develops is when we have proficiency-based standards like we do in North Carolina. So Sally's going to start out, alphabetically speaking, with our English language development standards.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. I get super excited. I'm like, I don't see names that are in the ESL world. So I'm like, ooh, I get to talk about this. Okay, so we were talking about the sub-criteria collaboration, and something that helped us reflect is, okay, we have on the screen the WIDA English Language Development Standards, and these are the standards that represent the social, instructional, and academic language that our students that are learning English as a second language need to, for them to be able to engage with their peers, educators, and the content that they're learning in the schools. So what I love about the graph on the screen is that standard one, that is the language for social and instructional purposes, it's aligned and it's related to all the other four standard statements, the language for language arts, for math, for science, and social studies, because it tells our educators that our students need to learn how the academic language to be able to access all these other content areas. But when we talk about CO2, the sub-criteria, we think about our students and how it's crucial that they also learn that uh, their language development process is not something that is not only impacted by their teachers. It's not only their responsibility, that they also can contribute to developing their language skills, and that they need to develop those language skills for the other content areas, not only for the social language. Because one example in the one of the language learning settings is, for example, when students are learning a heritage language, they feel like, oh, I already speak the language. I speak this language at home and I can communicate with my relatives. But when they are in the classroom, they don't see the relevance of learning and developing writing and reading skills. So helping them understand this facilitates their learning process, because then they feel like, oh, so yeah, there is something else that I need to learn. And if I contribute to that process, then it's going to be easier. And then we have on the screen also some of the components of the ELD standards framework. And those are the can-do philosophy, the performance definitions, and the can-do descriptors. They're very similar to what you in World Languages are doing with your students. So the difference here is maybe the naming, how we have the different levels of proficiency in ESL, or in the English as a second language world, and is that we have 6 different levels: level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and how we help our students move in that continuum. And they start maybe in, not all of them start in level 1 entering, but once they have identified and being placed, then they know what are those specific skills they need to develop and start working on, so they can reach the last level of proficiency that would be reaching. And it's just not for, what I love about these criteria is that it's not just for us educators, it's also for the students, and that they understand that it's important to use all the tools. And once they are exposed to listening, reading, writing, and speaking, they are learning and they are developing their language skills. So I want to turn it back to Anne-Marie so she can bring it down to world languages and the essential standards.
Great, thank you. And for our World Language Essential Standards, we have something very similar, where we want to take a look at how our standards are structured and how that supports us as educators in helping our students understand how language proficiency develops in all of our skill areas. You see here on the screen probably a graph that is very, very familiar to you. On the right-hand side is our weave graphic, that's what we call it, the weave, that shows how our 4 standards are woven in with our 3 strands, so that when we think about proficiency in our different skill areas and concepts, we realize that proficiency is built throughout. And so we have, for our 4 standards, that interpersonal communication, that informal communication that we do every day, whether that's in speaking with someone when we see them, either online or in person, or in texting with someone, so a writing component of interpersonal communication. We also have standard number 2, interpretive communication. This is listening, reading, and viewing. So how do we interpret what we hear, what we see, either in written form and reading, or what do we see visually, particularly with American Sign Language or other visual languages, but also other visual representations that help us understand the messages being shared. The third essential standard is about presentational communication. And this is formal speaking, where you've had a chance to rehearse, or writing, where you get a chance to draft something and get some feedback and improve it. And finally, of course, culture weaves through it all. We want to know how students are developing intercultural competence and how they're using their proficiency of the language and of that culture on things like gestures and greetings to show that they understand and they can communicate effectively and appropriately. Woven through that, of course, is our 3 strands, and the strands make sure that we're aligned to our national standards from ACTFL, the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages. So we have connections to language and literacy, where we look at things like biliteracy development, the transfer of literacy skills from language to language. We also have connections to other disciplines, where students are using language from math and science and other areas, particularly when we think about building their skills, let's say, with nonfiction texts, or when we think about our dual language immersion and heritage language programs and how that works with them to use the language of other disciplines, kind of like you saw with the ESL standards. And finally, the communities component, where we think about how do we take our language and our skills out into the community, whether that's the community of learners of the same language that we're studying and learning, or the community of native speakers of the language that we're learning. So through all of that, one of the things we know that we have with our proficiency-based standards is proficiency outcomes, where we expect students to be, or what we expect students to know and be able to do with language once they complete a course or a program. And so you see that arrow is pointing out that component of this overview of our state standards, where we have a proficiency level and description of what students can do at each level and with each communication skill. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that the graphic we're looking at in this overview of our standards is available in our administrator guides for world languages. I'm going to put into the chat box right now a link to those different administrator guides. We have 3 different ones in world languages. We have one for classical languages like Latin and ancient Greek. We have them for dual and heritage languages, like any language that's being taught through content, or to heritage language like native speakers programs. And then we have modern languages ones that speak to language when it's taught as a separate subject. So those administrator guides all have this weave graphic that kind of explain our standards and how this looks. Also with that, coming up on the screen is the inverted pyramid of proficiency, again, that we use from ACTFL, because ACTFL is our national proficiency scale that's used across our learning communities K-20, and also in things like interpretation and translation activities and military and diplomacy. So here you see our proficiency scale going from the beginning at novice low when students are just learning basic words and phrases, up through the intermediate levels and sublevels where they can start to put language together in new ways and really survive with the language skills they have, and then into the advanced levels where students can do quite a bit with language, use things like the past, present, and future tenses to really describe who they are, what's going on, and what's happening in their world with the language that they have. Obviously, our actual proficiency scale goes up then through superior and even to the distinguished level of proficiency. And we can see by the inverted pyramid that language proficiency develops over time and becomes more complex. That's why the inverted pyramid is there. So when we think about our criteria for today about teachers sharing with students how language proficiency develops, it's good to frame it out in our minds like this to think about how our standards are structured to do that and how those proficiency outcomes based on our actual proficiency scale help us conceptualize that and share that with students or others who need to think about language learning and how that's happening in the 21st century. Do keep in mind too with our proficiency outcomes and our K-12 standards, we have outcomes that go from novice low up through advanced mid. As I said, you can see that we have proficiency levels that go far beyond that, of course, but that's our expectation based on the time we have with students, as well as things like their developmental level and the different types of programs that they're in. All right. So as we get more into this idea of the telecollaboration domain and criteria, I'm going to go ahead and have us do this activity here, which is basically you get to download a handout for your use during this broadcast and for your use later on. I'm putting links in the chat right now so you can get to that. Please go ahead and download our telecollaboration document. This is one of 7 domains, so we're focusing on collaboration today. We have it as a PDF Google link, as you can see. It's also posted on our LinguaFolio Cafe's page in the Canvas Hub. And then you can go also straight to the TEL Framework webpage and download it from there. We do want you to download a copy for yourself and then skim the 3-lettered sub-criteria for this session's focus of CO2. I'll pause for a moment while you do that. All right, I hope you've got your handout for today. Please keep that up on the screen. If you need to, of course, you can always print that out if you prefer hard copies, but we're going to be using it today throughout. And I'd like to offer it to you as well as a resource, because the TEL project is a national project that we all have access to. So these materials are shared for free throughout the country. You'll notice that this says the TEL Collaboration Domain Criteria 2019. The TEL project itself started about 10 years ago, and they first issued their documents like this for us to use in 2014. So if you've gone to the TEL Framework webpage at any time, including today, you'll see that the original documents are still posted from 2014, but we use, of course, the newly updated documents that were published in 2019. All right, so now that we've got our materials, let's reflect on implementing CO2, that collaboration criteria, with our proficiency-based North Carolina standards, whether that's in English language development or in the World Language Essential Standards. We sometimes ask when you come into these broadcasts if your background is ESL or world languages or both, because we know some teachers live in both worlds, linguistically speaking. But this is a chance for you to reflect on your own teaching strategies and pedagogy and so forth with this particular perspective of CO2. So let's just walk through our 3 CO2 subcriteria. You see on your handout that A is the teacher provides opportunities for students to reflect on how well they meet course performance objectives and their own learning goals. So let's pause for a moment, think about how you share course performance objectives and learning goals with students. One thing we hear from teachers a lot for this particular approach here about the course performance objectives and the learning goals is that our state standards are set up very well, because we do have those proficiency outcomes. And so we do know where students should be at the end of a course, what they should be able to do with language, and that helps us structure learning goals for them within our curriculum, as well as helping them understand how to structure their own goals as they move forward in their language learning. B is the teacher works with students to reflect upon and highlight their growth in language development. Now, of course, this one makes perfect sense when we think about it with LinguaFolio. LinguaFolio is a formative assessment tool for language learning. And so formative assessment has a lot to do with reflection and considering where you start and where you have progressed to. Those of you who used LinguaFolio for a while may be thinking, oh, B would clearly link to, for example, the dossier, where students are choosing examples of their work to link to particular can-do statements from LinguaFolio that match and show what they can do with the language. Keep in mind, this is a very good way to think about this, but also that LinguaFolio belongs to the student. So when we think about students selecting work that really shows their skills and their progress over time, we as teachers, of course, can give them guidance on that, but it's really up to them, the items they choose to put in a dossier like this, because we want them to reflect upon their growth and then choose the best items or demonstrations of their language development to put in their LinguaFolio. And finally, the C subcriteria. The teacher collaborates with students to identify next steps for language growth. And again, this has a natural link to LinguaFolio and the work we do with it. We know that part of what's happening with LinguaFolio is helping our students see where they need to go next in their language skills. So what they've accomplished and reflect upon that, but then to be able to answer the question themselves of why are we doing this and what comes next. They can look at those can-do statements in LinguaFolio, or they can look at the LinguaFolio-like statements that teachers develop for their daily lessons and units and curriculum that they have in the classroom. This helps students look at next steps and start to set their own goals for language growth, and sometimes to set their own goals for other things that they're learning as well. So when we think about that, we want you to think about your teaching, your specific strengths as a teacher and approaches, your classrooms or learning spaces that you teach in. Maybe you're face-to-face, or maybe you're online, or maybe in a hybrid environment. Maybe you're with high school students or middle school students or elementary students. And so think about your teaching, your learning spaces, and the activities you design for your students. And consider which of the sub-criteria for CO2 are professional strengths for you. There's only 3, but we want you to choose 1 or 2 that are professional strengths for you. I'll go ahead and launch that poll so you can share that information. Oh, it looks like we have a little technology snafu with our poll. It's set to go for 5 minutes. Of course, we need a little time to think about this when it comes to professional strengths, but we won't take 5 minutes. Let's take about 2 minutes. So you still have time to think and get your responses in. All right, got about 20 more seconds. If you haven't responded already, please go ahead and do so we get a read on what the professional strengths are in our broadcast space today. All right, I'll go ahead and close the poll. And then we can share the results so everyone can see them. All right. Well, it looks like almost everyone today decided that A, the teacher provides opportunities for students to reflect on how well they meet course performance objectives and their own learning goals is a professional strength for them. Not a big surprise, because as us for teachers, of course, this is one of the first things we focus on. When we do things like begin with the end in mind, we focus first on what the goals are and what our objectives are, so that we make sure we do that backwards design and build from what students should know and be able to do, and then move on to assessments and then finally activities in the classroom to build those skills. We'll also have people who identified B and C as professional strengths. So there's strengths across the board here, and you may have 1 or 2 of these that you see as strengths for yourself. I'm going to go ahead and leave those up in the control panel so you can see those sub-criteria. And then we're going to go ahead and take a look at those sub-criteria from a slightly different perspective. So when we take a look at these, A, B, and C, and think about which are our strengths, we want to share with each other. So we want to ask you, what examples from your classroom or learning space can you think of for one of these sub-criteria? We're going to ask you to shout that out, either by shouting and writing, so typing the letter of the sub-criteria you want to talk about, and then typing your example into the chat box. You can share it with everyone, and you can share with us what you do in your classroom specifically that is sort of a good example of this particular sub-criteria. You can also shout orally. Just let us know if you want to say it out loud rather than type it in the chat box, and we will unmute you so that you can share that letter and your example out loud and kind of describe what you do in the classroom. That would be a good example of that sub-criteria. I'll pause for a moment and I'll take a look at to see if anyone has their hand raised to shout it out loud, or we'll look in the chat box to see what comes up in the shouted out in writing. We're eager to see your responses. I realize some of you may be thinking it over or typing into the chat box to share. Sally and I will also be sharing examples from our classrooms when we were teachers before we became administrators. All right, starting to see our chat box fill up with your examples. That's great. Go ahead and continue to add those, and we're going to go over them in a moment before moving on to the next part of our broadcast. All right, as you can see, C is a popular option here. We've got for C, subcriteria C about collaborating with students to identify next steps for language growth. Someone's saying after students finish Chinese level 2, they encourage them to continue on to level 3 so they can apply what they've learned to daily life. That's right. So as students are progressing through levels 2 and 3 in a world language classroom, they are building that proficiency where they can really take their knowledge, what they can know and are able to do with the language out into the real world, into their daily lives. We also have another person who says with C, that in their class, they provide feedback on LinguaFolio submissions so they can use the feedback to help set goals. It's an excellent idea because we know LinguaFolio is a formative assessment tool, so we're not grading it or anything like that as teachers, obviously, but providing students feedback about the things they're putting in their LinguaFolio can really help them see if they're on track with things, and then that in turn helps them set some additional goals with language learning. All right, we've also got people talking about providing opportunities for students using the inquiry cycle, and then using a lot of oral assessment where the teacher records the student, they highlight correct answers and explain why things are accurate, and then they reflect on ones that maybe haven't mentioned or understood why there's no communication taking place. So supporting students in what they can do with language, in this case orally, but then helping them reflect on what they could do better. We also see the use of things like exit tickets in the classroom, again, to help students identify where they're at and maybe set their own learning goals going forward. All right. Well, thank you so much for thinking about CO2 from this perspective and considering how the things you're already doing in your classroom reflect that and are good examples of how you bring this information to your learning space and help them build proficiency and understand proficiency growth. You can continue to put answers in the chat if you would like, but I'm going to go ahead and move on to our next section so we stay on time and turn it back over to Sally.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. And now we're going to talk about one of the components of LinguaFolio, and it's the language biography. And we're super excited because once we created our Canvas hub, we added all the different resources, classroom materials that you can use either for ESL or world languages. And we house all those resources, and for years our teachers asked for additional materials because they were using those resources with level 1 students, students that are being just exposed to the new language. So last year, if we go to the next slide, or maybe, okay, we talk about the different components and we can explore. I think we still have some time to explore some of those. And the components, what they do is LinguaFolio helps the students become reflective and autonomous of their language learning. So with the components, what they create is this personal record of their language learning experiences. So it's a transition. They learn how they are learning the language, what are those opportunities or activities they can create or be exposed to use the language and learn the language, and then sort of like an inventory, a record of those different activities and things they have done to develop their language skills. So we have 6 components: the how do I learn, learning inventory, intercultural encounter reflection, intercultural experience summary, language activities, and progress report. So if we open the how do I learn, the first, maybe we have time to explore a couple for 10. But then we always offer this in English. And this was that opportunity for the student to see how is it that I learn? How do I organize my work? So they will see their space. How is it that they think they learn best? The different settings in which they think that they can learn, and how they think about and reflect on their learning process. And they also think about the vocabulary, the pronunciation, and the different skills that they need to develop in order to learn the language. So this How Do I Learn biography component is a 2 document with a list that will help the students identify those different components and say, okay, so I learn in this way, and does it mean that I can learn better if I change something, if I improve something, or if I continue doing something? So this is something that usually is done. It could be done at the beginning of the school year or at the beginning of an activity if you're working on a specific unit. So then that helps the students set those goals, start setting those goals and thinking, what is it that I'm going to do to really acquire the information and learn the language that I need for this specific content or unit, or what I'm doing, or maybe semester or school year, depending on your goals and your instruction plan. So this is one. The other one is the learning inventory. We can explore that one. I think it's the second one. Yes. Okay. And this one is more like, what is it that I've done using the language? So how often do I use one of these, or I get involved in these activities? So they talk about interpret some graphics, visual resources. How often do I memorize, or I'm exposed to songs and different chants? How often do I read? What kind of readings do I have and include in the new language that I'm trying to learn? And then different activities. What is it that I've been doing, and how often I do these activities in order to set my goals? And again, say, well, if you opt to do it at the beginning, then this will help them plan that strategy, that learning strategy. But if you do it in the middle of the unit or the school year, then they will see what is it that I was exposed to, and maybe for the remaining of the school year, I want to do something different and be exposed to more activities, or maybe I focus on one of the language domains. I was very focused on writing, but now I think I need to work a little more on reading or speaking. So determining that frequency helps the students see like, oh, so maybe I never watch TV in the new language. Maybe I never listen to songs in the new language. What happens if I do it now? And then you set those goals with the students, and then it helps them understand and do it in their own process when they start developing those reflective and autonomous learning skills as well. And then Marie, please feel free to jump in if you want to share something about world languages, because I know I'm trying to talk about new language, try not to be very specific to ESL, but if you want to share something, just go for it.
Yeah, I think you're doing great. And the important thing to remember here is that these biography components have been available in English, as you saw from the stamp on them, for a number of years, over a decade. And they're really good reflection tools, particularly when we think about supporting our students and looking at their proficiency growth and how they learn the language, what works best for them, and maybe give them some ideas on what else they could do. Notice there's some other things here with things like intercultural encounter reflections and summaries where they're considering how those interactions go with let's say, native speakers or native signers of the language they're learning, as well as thinking through, when they've interacted with a community of speakers, whether that's, again, someone out in the community who uses the language that they're learning, or it may be interacting with other learners of that same language in some capacity. And as Sally said, it's a new language for them, whether they're learning English as a second language or they're learning a world language as a second language.
Yes, thank you, Anne-Marie. And when we think about using the components, we always talk about recognizing our students as multilingual learners. They have a first language. And this is what brings to the next slide, because we said, okay, we want to be able to provide authentic experiences and opportunities to use the new language, or languages for English native speakers, and as Anne-Marie was saying, for our English learners, English as a second language. And sometimes it's really hard to do when the kids are in this emerging or novice level and they feel like it's okay, I need to reflect, but I need to know the language so I can really focus on reflecting on my process and not maybe translating or trying to understand what is in the format that we're using. So for years, many of our teachers said we need these components in different languages. In October, we were super excited to announce that we had these languages: Arabic, Chinese, Hindi, Spanish, Urdu, and Vietnamese. And we started with that set of translations, thinking these are the top languages in the state. And then we will cover a lot of those languages. And then we say, well, our teachers can use them. And we always think about using them in those first stages. And also, if the kid is fluent in the other language, then how to help them see their learning as an asset perspective. When we always talk about that the first language, that language they speak at home, is something that needs to be valued by them, by themselves, and also value in the school. So then if they want to do it in the first language, even if they're fluent in both, then they can share with the other kids in their classroom and say, hey, this is my first language and I can do these reflections in my first language. And if we're using it with novice or emergent bilinguals, then that will help them if they're literate in the language, because then they will see and be able to focus in those reflection processes and not just in like, what is it that I need to complete in this form? So we had this set and we were really excited. I don't know if you have in the chat, Anne-Marie, any comments, if anyone has had the opportunity to explore this that was released in October last year. Maybe one of our participants has been able to use them. I would love to hear if you have been able to see to use it and you see that it's valuable that the kids engage in that reflection process. I don't see anything in the chat right now, but maybe you didn't know this existed. And now you're getting excited and getting a lot of ideas. And we're going to have an activity in the next slides for you to share those initial ideas that you might have to implement this. And then this year, if we go to the next slide, we were able to complete the second set of languages. So we have the translation now into French, German, Hmong, Japanese, Korean, and Russian. So this is just fantastic because it was released, completed the project last week. And we said we need to share in the LinguaFolio Café for the next session next week and make sure that all our educators know that these are now available, that this is free, that you can use them. And Marie is sharing all the different links in the chat. And remember that if you access our Canvas Hub, you will have all these materials. So don't worry, you don't need to copy all the different links today. If you are maybe exploring one, don't feel like you're going to lose the other ones. I know for world languages, you might focus on just one. But for our ESL educators, they might have students that speak different first languages, so then they might have to explore more than one set of documents. But anything you want to add, Anne-Marie? We are super excited about this project and we work on this, and this has been a request for years, and having it now is just fantastic. So please share in the chat if you had any opportunity to use the first set or not.
Yeah, and I'll just add, Sally, we have these materials just like the ones in English in both PDF and Word documents. So when you click on things like the link to the Russian folder, let's say, or any of the folders we've got on display, you get your choice as a teacher, whether you want to use those documents in PDF or you want to use them in Word with your students. And so like Sally said, all of these are hooked up in LinguaFolio Hub. We're just giving you the quick links to the folders because we are going to do an activity with this and we wanted to give you a chance to look at these today. So the How Do I Learn document that we looked at before in English, of course, is available in Russian, as you saw. And as I'm pulling it up on the screen, I don't know if any of you use Russian or have proficiency in Russian, but here you can see just the same exact document we looked at before, but now in a language other than English for our students whose first language might be, in this case, Russian. We do know it's important for students to reflect in their first or home or heritage language. That's easiest for them, and that's kind of the way their brains think, especially when they're learning a new language, as they revert to their first language to think that through and do their reflection, which is so important with LinguaFolio.
Yes, and we have in the state LinguaFolio online. And then if you're using that platform, then you now have these other resources to complement what you're doing in the platform. Or if your district is using one of the learning management systems, Google Classroom or Canvas, then you have that option to use these documents and upload them to your courses, and then being able to use them and have them available for your students. And that's what Anne-Marie was sharing, that we have those two different formats, Word and PDF. So then you can use the one that you think is suits your needs in a better way. So we have an activity. I was mentioning we got you all excited about this, and we really want to learn from you. What do you think? Initial thoughts about implementing this. So we're going to work on a Jamboard, and we have a slide in which we're going to show you how it works if you're not familiar with Jamboard. But we're going to respond to this question. How would you implement the LinguaFolio biography components to support students' understanding of how language proficiency develops? So this is aligned to our sub-criteria, CO2. The teacher shares with students how language proficiency develops. So what we're going to do in the Jamboard is you're going to grab one sticky note, and you're going to add the biography component we shared for, and you can see our little bitmojis and the components are there listed. So you can choose one and then type that title so we know which is the one that you think you could use. And then write your response in 2 sentences or less. What are those thoughts, those ideas? And then if you want, you can include your name, or you don't have to. Then we're going to take a few minutes, maybe 4 minutes or 5 minutes, depending on how long we still have. I think we still have 10 minutes. And we might take 4 minutes for you to complete this activity. So let's go to the next slide. So we look at how Jamboard will look like once you click on the link. And we're going to add the link in the chat. It's a bit.ly link. And once you access this link, you will see the menu, all the different options on the left, and the arrow is showing you the one for the sticky notes. So you click on that icon, it will create a sticky note. And you can play, you can change the colors if you want. You don't have to. The default is yellow, but if you want to change them, then you can do it. And then you type your response. And just remember, the title would be what is that LinguaFolio biography component you want to use, and those ideas of how to use it. And once you finish, click on Save so you can post your sticky note and we all can see it. So let's see if everyone had access. We have the link in the chat, and these are the directions again, so you can have your question. How would you implement one of those? Or if you have some time and you think, oh, I can use 2 or 3, then just create as many sticky notes as you want. And I think I'm going to be quiet so you can check again, go and explore. You have the links. So we're going to set a timer. What do you think, Anne-Marie? 4 minutes?
Yes, 4 minutes sounds great.
Okay, okay. Okay, and just a clarification, once you click on the link in the chat, it will say it's an external link. It's just the Webex system. You just need to click there in that blue button, and then you will be redirected to the Jamboard.
I'm going to pop over to our Jamboard just by clicking our bit.ly link. I see a lot of you are already over there. And I see that responses are starting to appear. Great. Also, keep in mind that the second page of our Jamboard here is from our previous broadcast where we introduced the first set of biography components in those languages other than English. So there's a lot of learning and sharing going on this Jamboard with how we can use our biography components in the classroom in various languages.
Okay. So if you are still thinking or typing, just hit enter, and please know that this Jamboard is still available and you can add more comments or come back and read the other comments that other participants have included. I see we have some participation, so thank you very much. And please make sure that you will come back and read. Just for the sake of time, I'm going to ask Anne-Marie to go back to our slide deck and maybe share some of our last slides. I think we have a few more minutes and then we can work on those slides. But thank you. I see these are great ideas and uses of language inventory. How do I learn? I see like how do I learn is the one with more interest that you think that it will help your students reflect on their study habits, that it will help as an exit ticket for your students. So thank you very much. And please continue if you are typing. We just want to make sure that we cover all our information so you have all that available as well before we finish our session. So I'll turn it back to you, Marie.
Great. Thanks so much, Sally. And thanks to everyone for participating and sharing from your classrooms today. We are going to head into our wrap up and reminders. Of course, one of the most important things is to always keep you informed. So you can sign up for our NCDPI listservs on the link you see there, and I'm putting that in the chat too. By virtue of attending today, you get signed up for the NC LinguaFolio listserv, or we just verify that your email address is already there. But we also have other listservs you may be interested in, like the World Language Instructors listserv, which is K20, the Teachers of English Learners listserv, the DLI educators, plus many others that could help you in your work. You get information about broadcasts like the one we're doing today, as well as things like our new biography components materials. In addition, we want to remind you about all of our professional learning. Obviously, you know about our series of webinars and cafes. They're on Tuesdays at 3:30 to 4:30. We do focus on our best practices for implementing LinguaFolio with our state standards, and we use that lens of the TEL project framework. You see here on the list, we've done 3 of our 5 broadcasts for this year in this professional learning series, but we've got 2 coming up, March 15th and May 17th. So I'm going to go ahead and put in the chat links to some of those materials, including the signups for the upcoming cafe and webinar later on this school year. In addition, we always remind everyone the archives from each webinar or cafe are posted in our LF for NC Canvas hub. You see the link there, and we've shared it before as well. You can use these resources for your local PD. And as Sally mentioned, there is an asynchronous credit option. So if you enjoyed this broadcast and you think someone else might, or if you're listening to the recording, know that you, for a limited time, can earn a certificate of completion for completing this. So for example, right now, our December 14th LinguaFolio Cafe asynchronous option is out until February 1st. So you have some time after the broadcast to do that and get your certificate. In addition, if you're attending live, and if you attend live, you get a certificate of attendance instead of a certificate of completion for the asynchronous. So your certificate of attendance comes about 1 week after our live broadcast, sometimes a little sooner, depending on how many certificates there are to process and which other webinars are going on. So look for an email with your attached certificate approximately 1 week from today. And as always, we remind everyone that your public school unit, your district or charter school, must approve professional development offerings in all formats for those contact hours to count towards your license renewal. We also have the Introduction to LinguaFolio training. That's a self-paced Canvas course. It's 10 hours long or 1 CEU, and it's self-paced. You can sign up when you're ready, and you can do it in the time that works best for you. There's an overview of LinguaFolio as a formative assessment tool for language learning, and then there's some how-to information, how to implement LinguaFolio in your classroom, and how to access LinguaFolio for free for you and your students. It is available both in our statewide system, North Carolina Educator Evaluation System, or NESIS system, for our teachers here in North Carolina. It's also available in Canvas Commons if you're outside of that system, K-12, maybe in higher ed or outside of North Carolina in some fashion. You can also download the version of this in Canvas Commons if you want to do your own instructor-led course about Introduction to LinguaFolio. I'm going to let Sally take this one and tell us about the monthly leaflet for LinguaFolio.
Yes, so we have a monthly leaflet where we share professional learning opportunities, all the different archives, our broadcast and LinguaFolio Café sessions, and we also share information about the rebranding on LinguaFolio to Lingua Grow that is in progress. And we always encourage you to use these resources for local training and or individual review. So please feel free to use everything, adapt this to your needs, and then please share with us so we know the impact that is having in your districts and your students.
Right. And that's it for us. We thank you for joining us. We are the NCDPI LinguaFolio team. I'm Anne-Marie Gunter, and of course you've heard Sally as well today. You can get information you need from our LF for NC Canvas Hub. And you can see us on Twitter, as you see there, as well as using hashtag LF for NC on the Twitter hashtag. You also see Stacy Daniels. She's the supervisor over all languages at North Carolina, whether that's English language arts, ESL, or world languages. And you can contact her. And you may also want to keep track of Teresa Parker's email address. Teresa is our administrative specialist for our section. She's the one who'll be sending the email with your certificate of participation for today. I'll go ahead and put information about all of us in the chat. So you've got that information. Should you need to reach out to us, you certainly can, and we encourage you to do so. Oh, and I see that Dr. Daniel is on the line with us today. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Daniel. You're welcome to share anything else you'd like to, but we all appreciate you being here today and learning more about LinguaFolio and how you can implement it in your classroom.